And so some of the issues that we need to start thinking about is how we use media, large media platforms to reach millions. And so let me just turn quickly to James Painter. James, you already introduced yourself. You're former correspondent of the BBC for Latin America. And you very recently launched a book that was very provocative. And you became sort of a minor celebrity.
Okay. You can get that far.
That is basically looking at critiquing the role of journalism in how journalists communicate and use science and scientific evidence to change the way we perceive climate change and other problems. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how do you see journalists?
I'll be very quick. Is my mic working okay? Yeah. Okay, very, very quickly, we did a 12-country study of how the media, print media and online media reported the Copenhagen summit. And one of the big headline news out of that, because there are so many Brazilians here, I'll let you know that Brazil and India had by far the most coverage of the Copenhagen summit of any countries in the world, which may surprise many, many people. They would have thought that the UK or the USA or Australia or some of the Western countries would have had most, but Brazil by far and India by far had the most coverage in the print media. And in all the surveys that we've done in the BBC as well over the last 2 or 3 years, it may interest you to know that Brazil is often the country that comes out amongst the top in anywhere in the world for those people who are concerned about climate change. The not so good news, if you like, was that whereas the broadsheet media had a lot of coverage in many countries, it wasn't an issue that the tabloid media did a lot of coverage on. In other words, it remains a really difficult challenge to get climate change, environment as a popular issue in mainstream media. And the other top line, if you like, of what we discovered was that the journalists were not very good at including background information about the science in their reporting. There were some very important exceptions to that, but the general trend was that most of the articles, 80%, had less than 10% of the coverage of Copenhagen about the science. Now you could say journalists are attracted to drama, adversarial politics, etc., and not climate change. But here was a great opportunity. 4,000 journalists at Copenhagen. There's been no other political event, as far as we know, where there have been that many journalists. Of course, the World Cup and the Olympics, yes. And here was a great opportunity to explain the science. But on the whole, journalists didn't do that. So what we were trying to do in the study was to look at ways that how do you make these really important long-term, slow-fuse issues like climate change, like sustainability, like biodiversity, entertaining. As Pedro was saying, how do you make them fun, interesting, relevant to people's lives? And I'm sure we'll come back to this, but new media is one of the really, really important ways that you can do that. But I'll leave it there for the moment.
So let me ask you a very, very concrete and perhaps difficult question. 2 days ago, CNN and Televisa, the national Mexican broadcasting network here in Cancun, publicly committed to integrating more of the environmental issues into their core programming. And that really felt a bit like PR, like public relations. Yeah? What is your view? I mean, if what can leaders do, and how can the media, the big media, big marketing machine, become a force for change? Is that realistic?
Well, I don't think it's the role of media. You may shout at me, but I don't think it's the role of media to be advocates or necessarily to be a force of change. The role of the media is to present accurate, interesting, entertaining information so that the general public can make their decisions. But in the case of television, it really is important because despite the advances of social media, in most media landscapes of the world, with the exception of Africa, TV is still by far the most dominant way that people receive information about climate change. And it's also by far the most trusted source of information, even though it's changing with new media. So television will remain extremely important. I would make one final comment on whether they're going to do more on the environment. If they do, it's great, but I'm slightly surprised because CNN cut their science and environment correspondence a couple of years ago. But I would make one point. I think part of the problem is that for the media, environment is put in an environment ghetto. And what the media must try and do, in my view, is treat it as an economic issue, a health issue, a technology issue, a transport issue, an international politics issue. And because it's kept in a green ghetto very often, I don't think it gets anything like the coverage that it should do.